About an hour and a half ago, President Trump began his second State of the Union speech. About a quarter of it was devoted to immigration issues. And now here in Statuary Hall, off the House chamber, is where the press is gathered. Members of Congress come out to give their reaction to the speech. We're going to begin with the reaction from Congresswoman Jayapal of Washington, a Democrat. First of all, the Democratic women were all dressed in white for what reason?
Sure, yes, it was very powerful, and you saw that almost all of us were on the Democratic side of the chamber. There were a couple of moments there where President Trump mentioned women and the power of women. I don't think he expected us to take it the way we did, but we all started high-fiving each other, and we were very happy that the power of women was recognized. And I would just point out we were all on the Democratic side of the chamber.
It seemed a little playful, though. He was playing with you a little bit there.
Yeah, I don't think he really had a choice. I mean, I think we sort of took over the floor at that moment, and I think it was really about the contributions of women to this country, and we're very proud that we have the most diverse, the most female Congress that we've seen in a long time.
There are 102 women currently in the House of Representatives. Congresswoman, were there any other times that you stood up and applauded during that speech?
Well, I applauded for some of the guests who came. I mean, some of the heroes of wars that he brought. I mean, I don't think that those folks should be dragged into, sort of a very difficult battle that we're having right now. But I will tell you that there were a lot of lies in there. Once again, he devoted, as you said, a quarter of his speech to immigration, almost all very negative, very, statistics that have been disproven before, painting immigrants as somehow these terrible forces, talking about a caravan invasion on the southern border, things that are just very difficult to sit there and listen to. And I think it's a real disservice. And he also said he lied when he said he wants people to come here legally. Actually, people who are seeking asylum on the southern border are doing that legally. They're coming in. It is legal to seek asylum. So just a continued set of tropes around immigration that are tired, destructive, and false.
He also called for increased legal immigration.
Well, except that everything that he has done since he's been president has been to call for decreased legal immigration. His proposal that he put forward last year and the Republicans put forward would have substantially decreased legal immigration. He's tried to decrease legal immigration of refugees, of asylees, of family-based immigration. I mean, nothing that when he says we think immigration is a great thing, nothing he's done in the last 2 years matches that. And I found that with a number of things that particularly that he started with. He said he wanted us to come together and not be stuck in gridlock and to compromise. And perhaps you saw Speaker Nancy Pelosi stand up and clap behind him like this as if to say, well, why don't you follow your own advice? Because he just shut down the government and sent 800,000 federal workers into a tailspin. And so I think we just have to remember that this president has done nothing to lift up the middle class. In fact, everything he's done has been to hurt the middle class. His tax cuts that he touted tonight, $1.5 trillion in tax cuts, middle class families got pennies. So he says nice things. I mean, he did stick to a speech, I think, for most of it anyway, that somebody had written for him, and he always does better when he sticks to a speech. There were some grandiose ideas there, but very little that actually matches with his record of what he's done, even on some of the good things he said.
Final question, as somebody who represents a tech-rich area, Washington State, what about his calls for new trade agreements and new approaches to China, particularly when it comes to intellectual property?
Well, unfortunately, the NAFTA that he's created has no worker enforcements. And so I think, we need to make sure that the enforcement mechanisms are strong. But I think that, there are some pieces here where, interestingly, I, as a progressive Democrat, would say that I agree with him that the trade agreements were not crafted in a way that was fair to American workers. But the way that he's gone about some of what he's done, unilateral decisions, not coming to Congress, I think those are very problematic.
Pramila Jayapal, Democrat of Washington. Thanks for being on C-SPAN.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Ben Carson is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Secretary Carson, What in that speech related to what you do for a living these days?
Well, when we talk about quality of life for our people, that's really what we're doing now. We're changing our agency from one that sort of just puts people under a roof to one that gives people an opportunity to climb the ladders and really to realize the American dream. We want people to realize the American dream is for everybody.
What in the last 2 years, what's the approach that you've taken at HUD that may be different than what we're doing in the past?
Well, I've tried to bring a lot of business principles to what we're doing. For instance, we have a CFO now. We have now a CFO for 8.5 years. Can you imagine with the billions of dollars going through there and not having appropriate financial controls? That's angered some people because they were used to be able to get loose money. That's okay because this is taxpayers' money and we have to protect it. So, those kinds of principles and just getting people to understand that what we're doing has nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats. It has to do with how do we elevate our people because they're our most precious resource. And if they're strong, then the country's strong.
Did the recent shutdown hurt your department?
Well, it certainly wasn't helpful, but we have just tremendous people. They were in there day and night. They were there on the weekends, and not a single person suffered or had to be evicted because of things that were going on at HUD.
2 questions. Number 1, do you see a return to medicine after your service?
No, I think I've had my quota of medicine. It was a wonderful career. I still enjoy it because I see my patients all the time. They're all grown up now, but it's fantastic to see them.
And lastly, it seems like President Trump utilizes his cabinet rather frequently.
We do have a lot of interaction, a lot of discussion. The Bible says in the multitude of counselors is safety.
Do you ever get a call from him?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, I have great admiration for him because he is somebody who is under attack 24/7. There is nothing that he can do that is right, and yet he just keeps going.
Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, thanks for stopping by. And we are here in Statuary Hall until 1857. This was the House of Representatives. Presidents Madison, Monroe, Jackson, and Fillmore were all inaugurated in this building. Congressman Chris Smith, of Republican of New Jersey, I don't know if you knew that or not.
I did,
I'm
but
sure you
it's
did.
an amazing place.
One of the issues that you've talked about frequently over the years is the issue of abortion, and the president brought that up tonight.
He did, and he did it in a very compassionate, very direct way, pointing out that the New York law and the one that's pending in right next door in Virginia kills babies right at birth. I think a lot of people are beginning to realize that right now over 61 million babies have been killed by abortion since 1973. And it equates with the entire population of Italy. And increasingly, the abortion lobby and many members of Congress and governors like Cuomo extend it right to the moment of birth and then not take any action to defend a child who survives a late-term abortion. We have legislation that has passed the House and the Senate and was signed by Bush, and a new bill that would deal with protecting the child when he or she emerges from the womb and is then just tossed aside like so much garbage. It is really brutal. Dismemberment abortions, where the child is literally cut to pieces, are commonplace. And I think the president's call to respect those innocent unborn babies and their mothers equally. I mean, we have to love them both. And that's what the pro-life movement has been saying. Our president today just very articulately, stated that in a way and showed how brutal it is to take the life of a baby right at birth.
When it comes to that issue, is there any room for compromise between the two sides?
Well, unfortunately, they've had it mostly their way since '73. The high bar of a Supreme Court decision is very difficult to overcome. We have passed a 20-week ban. I just reintroduced the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act with over 100 members of Congress joining me as co-sponsors. That says at 20 weeks and that's a very, very big baby, boy or girl, they feel pain at that point, and they feel it excruciatingly so. Just like the preemies, just like in utero surgeries that can actually save a child's life or repair a disability, or like spina bifida, or some other disease, or like I said, a disability. Those kids feel pain, so they anesthetize those kids before they do the surgeries. They don't do it with abortion. And we want to say, can we at least not agree to save those later term children? And the president called for a ban on late term abortions. That's the minimum we can do. I mean, these are children. One of the things I've noted in floor speeches, first baby pictures today are exclusively of unborn babies. When the wife or the mom announces to the family, they immediately get pictures that go up on the refrigerator of that unborn baby. It's all about affirming the life of that individual, and the president did so today.
And finally, just a little gear switch here. I know you've been on foreign affairs for many years. Africa's kind of been your focus, but I did want to ask the Venezuela question. Will Maduro continue to be the president, or will Mr. Guaido, will he be recognized, or will there be violence on that?
Well, my hope is that the world community further coalesce, with the notable exception right now, as we all know, of countries like Russia. Maduro has been a dictator. He has driven that country right into the dirt. And I think the president's recognition and other like-minded democratic nations around the world says we stand with reform and change, oxygen, allow people to have their individual human rights, which Maduro does not allow. He's a human rights abuser, and I chaired the Human Rights Committee for years. Venezuela is one of the worst in the world when it comes to human rights abuse. So my hope is that the people are speaking, large rallies. I worry about the violence like you do, like everyone does.
American intervention?
Well, the president has said nothing's off the table.
What's your view?
My view is that we need to keep working the political side, because I think that's where this could be a very effective transfer of power let's remember, he's elected. He's not someone who's just coming off the streets. He holds a very high position in that government, but he's all about reform, and that's what we need to be talking about.
Chris Smith, Republican of New Jersey. Post State of the Union address. Next up, we had Brad Sherman is who we have here.
Steve Chabot from Ohio.
I'm so sorry, Congressman Chabot. I saw Brad Sherman over there, and
That's
I missed
right.
you completely.
That's
I
quite all right.
apologize.
That's
Number
quite all
one,
right.
tell us about
No
your
problem.
district.
Yeah, the district is Cincinnati, Ohio. Most of Hamilton County and all of Warren County. It's city of Cincinnati and greater Cincinnati area.
How is it doing economically?
Reasonably well, but we can always do better. We've got a lot of small businesses. I happen to be the ranking member. I was the chairman in the last Congress of the Small Business Committee, and that's really the backbone of the economy. About 70% of the new jobs created in our area and all across America are small businesses, so an important part of the economy.
How did the president do tonight?
I thought it was a very uplifting speech, especially when he talked early on about members of Congress putting party second and putting the country first. Now, I have to acknowledge that Speaker Pelosi was sitting on her hands a lot of the time during that speech. I think she was at that point, too. So we'll see. Only time will tell if we can put party second and the country first.
Well, did you think if President Obama had been delivering that speech, Speaker Ryan would have been sitting on his hands?
Maybe. I'm not sure, but you never know. But I think the president was right. I'm glad he said it.
So, a lot of new members in Congress. What's your legislative priority now this is your first time in the minority, isn't it?
It's actually my second time in the minority. One of the few Republicans around here that's actually been in the minority. It's a whole lot more fun to be in the majority, but you do the best you can. And I do think we ought to be working together. I think that's what the people sent us here for. Whether we do that or not, of course, remains to be seen. One of the things I've done over the years is whenever I have a bill, I'm a Republican, I always try to get a Democratic co-sponsor to the bill. You got a lot better chance of getting things done that way.
Nydia Velazquez is your chairman on the Small Business Committee, right? What's your relationship?
That's right. We have a very good working relationship. When we were in the minority before, I was her ranking member, so she was the chair.
We lost. Doing economically? You've got a pretty good district out there, don't you?
Well, San Fernando Valley is doing about as well as the whole LA metro area. Things have been on the uptick really since about 2014 when Dodd-Frank became active and we got over the great financial crisis.
Just ended an LA school strike. What was it a good settlement in your view?
Well, we got it settled. And now it's up for the state government and especially the federal government to provide more money for K through 12 education because we have very large class sizes in the LA school district and there's no way to change the math. You need to support education and we need to do that nationwide.
Well, the president devoted about 2 paragraphs to education in his speech. Are you a charter school supporter?
Charter schools work well some of the times, but we've also seen a need to make sure that we have the right degree of oversight, and that's really a matter that needs to be decided by parents and by teachers from one school to another. I think in the LA school system, there's been a decision to maybe take a breath before more charters are created.
One moment where you sat on your hands during the President's State of the Union and one moment where you stood up.
I stood up when he pointed out that we need to be aggressive in our trade negotiations with China. That trade deficit is enormous. It has been growing. It is Democrats who in the last 20 to 25 years have opposed the bad trade deals that the country has entered into. It was Democrats who were skeptical of granting most favored nation status to China, which was the biggest trade mistake we've ever made and has led to now a roughly $350 billion trade deficit. So that's one time when I stood. I sat on my hands on a fair number of things. Clearly, when he's talking about building a wall, when almost 2/3 of the undocumented immigrants here in the United States landed at airports. Airplanes fly over walls.
Does illegal immigration affect your district?
We have undocumented immigrants everywhere in the United States, including and especially the San Fernando Valley. We've got people who have made their lives in the San Fernando Valley, who are part of our community, and the fact that they have to wake up every day and talk to their children, who are American citizens, about what happens if mom or dad gets deported. Even though that happens so rarely that it has no real effect on the economy, it has a tremendous effect on the family life and the well-being of both the children and the parents, and of course interferes with planning for the future. It disrupts the economy in that way. So we have to regularize these 11 million people, and the idea that they're going to be deported is absurd in any large numbers, but the deportations that do occur are just terribly disruptive.
Brad Sherman is a Democrat of California, spent a few minutes with us here in Statuary Hall. And from California to Florida, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. A couple of years ago, you brought Alonzo Mourning here as your guest to talk about some issues. Who'd you bring this year?
I brought Morgan Somer, who is the wife of a Coast Guardsman who is a helicopter pilot in Miami. And really, we wanted to make sure that we could stress the importance of working together and compromising and trying to make sure we can bring this budget deal in for a landing. I hope the president takes his own words to heart and actually looks towards compromise. We, in Miami today, in Port Everglades, brought in, the Coast Guard did, nearly $500 million of cocaine seizures. that our Coast Guards men and women did on the water, which is where there is a real crisis, unlike the lack of crisis on the border, on our southern border. So making sure that these families don't go through another shutdown that really hurt so many of them is absolutely essential.
Morgan, is it? Hi. Two questions. Number one, how did the recent shutdown affect your family?
It was difficult to have my husband continuing to report to work. He's standing duty. He's a search and rescue helicopter pilot, so he was still out performing flights at night out at sea. He was still conducting law enforcement flights, looking for migration, illegal migration, and drugs. So we were able to make adjustments in our family, but the shutdown that cut off the funding disproportionately affected the junior enlisted members. They were taking on secondary jobs, and when they're not on duty, they are supposed to be resting. So they're showing up for duties and servicing aircraft and things of that nature after they're tired from working their secondary job because their pay was withheld.
Is your husband career?
Yes, he's been in almost 18 years now, so we are hoping to be out and able to retire soon. So our hope was to build our forever home this summer, and with the shutdown hanging over our head, we're lenient or weary of making our deposits and things of that nature because we don't know how long we'll have to rely on our savings.
Now, I'm always curious, how did you two team up? Did you write a letter? How did that happen?
Well, during the shutdown, we were very focused on trying to make sure that we could highlight the stories of the 800,000 families across America that were impacted by the government shutdown. And, President Trump essentially held them hostage, shut the government down, insisting on a needless border wall. And Coast Guard families are really dramatically affected. They're all essential employees. They are on the front lines on the water every day protecting our country, and they were showing up to work, as Morgan said, and not being paid, missed 2 paychecks. And so we reached out to the Coast Guard to talk to them about who we could highlight to help make the case that A, we need to pass legislation to make sure that our Coast Guards and men and women get paid even during shutdowns just like the rest of our military, and I'm a co-sponsor of legislation to do that, and B, that we make sure that we don't leave these families twisting in the wind and over differences of opinion between the executive branch and the Congress.
February 15th is coming upon us rather quickly. If the president's willing to compromise, are the Democrats?
Well, yes, of course we're willing to compromise. If the president leaves Democrats and Republicans in Congress to sit down and negotiate a compromise and is willing to sign what we send him, even if it doesn't have his border wall that he, touted again tonight, then yes, we can. But if he insists on a needless border wall and engages in more distortions, lies, and hyperbole like he did tonight about the so-called crisis on the border, when the real crisis is occurring, for our families that he's separating at the border, which he didn't even mention at all, then we're going to have a problem.
Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz has been our guest, along with Morgan, the wife of a Coast Guard pilot, correct?
Yes.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for your time. Rob Whitman is a Republican from Virginia. Congressman Whitman, you're almost out there in Norfolk, aren't you, near the border or not?
Well, actually from northern Virginia, so I go from Prince William County, Fredericksburg, down to Williamsburg, and then all the way through the northern neck and middle.
You're the I-81 corridors.
Well, actually the I-95, I-64 corridor, so that area through there. I-81 a little bit further out to the west.
Virginia's gotten rather purple over the last couple of election cycles.
It is a very, very diverse state.
Why has that happened? It used to be reliably red.
Sure, I think that there are, just a variety of different viewpoints there. I think that, it varies from geographic region. I don't see it really as a delineation as far as parties. I do see that there's a difference between the rural areas, the suburban areas, and the urban areas. So I think if you look at it geographically, that's where you find the differences.
Where did you disagree with the president tonight? You are a Republican, but where did you disagree with him?
Well, I think the president laid out a very good case tonight about how the nation needs to come together not only its citizens, but its elected representatives in Congress to be able to get things done. So it's hard to have a difference with that, and looking at encouraging Congress to get things done, to talk about the things that are before us, to rebuild our military, to make sure that we lower the cost of health care, lower the cost of prescription drugs, make sure that we have a infrastructure plan for a crumbling infrastructure. Things are extraordinarily important in my district, as you spoke of. The upper part of the district, as well as the lower part of the district, deals with the I-95 corridor and the I-64 corridor. Both of them impact the quality of lives of people in the area, being able to commute back and forth. They want to see those things get done. In the rural areas of my district, broadband, rural broadband is an extraordinarily important part of people having economic opportunities. It's important for educational opportunities. It's important for telemedicine, so people have access to quality health care. They can do that through that conduit of rural broadband, which should be part of an infrastructure package. So I think the president really, appealed to a number of people across a number of different lines of thought about what we need to do as a nation to address the issues that are across these legislative districts, whether they're suburban areas, whether they're urban areas, whether they're rural areas. So I think those things are what people wanted to hear, and they wanted to understand the president was thoughtful and mindful of their issues and how he was going to propose to provide solutions to those issues.
Can infrastructure be done this year?
It has to be done. I think it's critical for our nation, whether it's roads, whether it's our ports. And in Virginia, we have the largest port in the area, the Virginia port in the Hampton Roads area. We have rural broadband as a big issue. We have road improvements. You know, the Northern Virginia area was identified as the #1 traffic issue in the entire United States. So I would say for Virginia, especially for my district, it's critical that this get done. So I don't think it's a matter of whether or not it gets done. I think it has to get done.
Rob Whitman, thank you for your time this evening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Should we call you Chief or Congresswoman? Which one do you prefer, ma'am?
Well, I answer to both of them. Pretty good titles.
Val Demings, former
Yes.
Chief of Police in Orlando.
Yes.
Congresswoman Demings.
Yes.
What made you stand up tonight?
Well, to hear the president, of course, recognize law enforcement, to recognize our military, to talk about children with cancer and lower prescription drugs, all of those things are what I believe the American people want to hear. What disappointed me tonight, though, was we just came out of a government shutdown, and there are 800,000 employees who are very worried about what's going to happen on February 15th. The president offered no reassurance to them that he would not shut the government down again over policy differences. And then when the president took a very sacred time, because I consider the State of the Union a very sacred time to talk to the American people, instead of delivering a message that they could walk away with, he turned this message to himself and started talking about ridiculous investigations. I just thought that was very inappropriate and very shameful.
When it comes to immigration, does Orlando have an issue there, especially with illegal immigration?
We need to get serious about comprehensive immigration reform. How many years have we as a Congress been talking about the need to do that, and every time legislation is put forth, it just is filed away in a drawer and nothing happens. That's what we really need to do. When the president went through what he believes it takes to have a good immigration plan, he talked about border security, he talked about his wall, but he did not talk about having an immigration program that's compassionate. Going through issues where children were ripped away or separated from their parents, and then to not add compassion. Look, I served as a law enforcement officer. Everybody counts, but everybody's accountable. You still have to have a policy where you treat people with dignity and respect and interject compassion when you can.
As a former Chief of Police of Orlando, what about the president's support for our men and women in blue?
That's where I started this interview, right? When he had the SWAT officer Stan, who went in during that very tragic shooting that happened. When he had the SWAT officer Stan, I was very proud of that. No great society can exist without law enforcement, so I can't help but be proud as a 27-year law enforcement officer when law enforcement is given the recognition that they so desperately deserve. But in order to make a community great, safety is just one part of it. You need good jobs, you need good health care, you need good educational systems. You need to make sure that your workers feel that when they go to work and work hard, they're going to get a good day's pay for that. It takes all of those things.
Is this your first time in the majority?
It's my first time in the majority, my second term. The majority feels really good. I'm very, very excited about getting some things done. I'm on Judiciary, Intelligence, and Homeland Security.
Val Demings will be looking for you on C-SPAN. Congresswoman and Chief. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You take care.
Pleasure. Author and Congresswoman Jackie Speer, Democrat of California. A lot of ERA yes buttons. Where did those come from, and why now?
Well, now more than ever. I mean, this is the almost the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote. Since 1923, there's been an ERA that has been introduced every year in Congress, and yet we still do not have a prohibition in the Constitution against sex discrimination. It's appalling when you think about it in this country at this time that women don't have that protection under the law. So the ERA is almost there. We have 37 states now that have passed it. We're waiting on the 38th. It could be Virginia or North Carolina or Arizona. And I have the bill that would create what's called the three-state solution, which strikes the deadline in the original ERA amendment that was passed back in 1972.
When you go back and watch the State of the Union tonight, you'll see yourself a couple of times not applauding, a couple of times applauding. Tell us when you stood up and when you did not.
So I stood up when he said that he supports paid family leave in this country. Now, the question is, how are we going to pay it and what is it going to look like? I support infrastructure funding. Again, how are we going to pay for it and what is it going to entail? A public-private partnership is not the answer. Government has got to step up in that regard. And thirdly, prescription drugs. We have to bring the cost of prescription drugs down. He's been saying it now for 2 years, hasn't delivered. Democrats are willing to work with him, and hopefully we'll be able to succeed.
I believe you're chairing the Military Personnel Subcommittee on Armed Services. Is that correct? What are you going to do in that position?
So we're going to look at the continuing problem of sexual assault in the military and, regrettably, in our academies. We're going to look at the issue of the Ferris Doctrine, where it prevents service members from suing for gross malpractice, for instance, or for sexual assault. That's one of the issues we're going to address as well. And then we're going to look at how we can better accommodate the entire family, because when a service member serves, so does that service member's family. And so we've got to take a deep dive into looking at what their needs are as well.
Should Ralph Northam resign for something that happened in college?
Well, it happened in medical school, and it was the 80s. Having the Ku Klux Klan costume and a blackface person, he's now saying it wasn't him. I'd have to see evidence of that. I actually am one of those that believes that he should resign.
I identified you as an author when you came up very quickly. What is your new book and how's it doing? Are you getting a good reception for it?
So the book is called Undaunted, Surviving Jonestown, Summoning Courage and Fighting Back, and it's doing really well. I can't say it's on the bestsellers list, but we've sold over 10,000 copies.
Well, you can watch Congresswoman Speer on Book TV on C-SPAN as well, talking about her book. We appreciate spending a few minutes with you this evening, ma'am. Paul Tonko is a Democrat from New York. Congressman, tell us about your district. Where is it located?
It's the Capital Region, Mohawk Valley in upstate New York, Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Saratoga Springs, Amsterdam, a great district to represent.
What committees are you on, and what are your legislative goals for this being in the majority now?
Sure. I serve on Energy and Commerce, and I serve on Science, Space, and Technology. Under Energy and Commerce, I now have the chairmanship responsibility of the subcommittee on Environment and Climate Change. So very distressed that I didn't hear a word about climate change. When the president talks about national security, climate change is an ultimate solution. When he talks about international harmony, climate change is a threat to that harmony. We need to address it. I will tell you, we're going to continue forward with our advocacy for climate change to be addressed. We're having our first hearing tomorrow. We will show the American public that we hear the people, we will embrace and respect science, we will let them know we understand the urgency, and we will work very hard to develop solutions based on science and evidence. So we're going to have a very aggressive approach. There's been a dry spell for far too long in the House of Representatives with this issue not being addressed. It impacts greatly on our economy, it impacts on public health, and it's costing us dearly.
So you bring a spotlight to that issue, but if you want legislation, A, what kind of legislation would you aim for? And B, what are you going to do about the Senate?
Okay, I think we have support in both houses, and I believe there's growing support based on the public's desire to have this issue addressed. So I'm confident we can approach this issue along two tracks simultaneously. One where we harvest the low-hanging fruit, energy efficiency, weatherization, conservation, research, grid modernization, recharging stations that are made more accessible, more readily fueling the cars that we electrify, and then also on a separate track but simultaneously address a price on carbon so that we can have an absolute measurement of reduction of carbon pollution. We need to be much more soundly the stewards of our environment, and we need to respect the generations that will follow us.
Your district has been affected by industrial job loss. The president seems to have an industrial policy. Do you agree with it?
Not always. I think his rhetoric doesn't match his actions. Basically, industry wants to know how they can do things in a more productive, more efficient way. Retrofitting our systems with opportunities that grow jobs and at the same time clean the environment are very much possible. And as we grow jobs in an innovation economy, they are least likely to be offshored, and they're most likely to provide great salaries. So I think we can grow the economy, we can grow industry with many startups that will be working on this agenda by addressing climate change. But the silence was deafening. And again, the rhetoric didn't match the performance over the first 2 years. Talking about pre-existing conditions, expressing a concern about health care, when under your clock we have seen 3 million fewer Americans insured. The numbers would have been far greater if his plans to repeal the ACA would have been taken to their completion. So I'm very concerned that this was a speech about distraction. It was talking about civility when you have in the same time time space added tweets that are nasty in their character and name calling going on, all while you're calling for civility. So I saw things happening here that were really about distraction and not really matching your performance to the rhetoric tonight.
The Democrats now own the state of New York, Governor Cuomo and the Assembly. What do you want to see done up there?
Well, I think that they're moving forward with a very green agenda for energy job creation. They're talking soundly about being a state that leads, even though the federal government has been pulled out of the Paris Accord by the president. Obviously, we want to work with the state people to continue to work away at the opioid epidemic, which I think is very important. And we want jobs of a manufacturing type and an innovation economy sort of job opportunity for upstate New York. We'll continue to work with state leadership in that regard.
Congressman Tonko, thank you for your time this evening.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
We are here in Statuary Hall, just off the House chamber. The president spoke for about an hour and a half tonight, and it was a 12-page speech. 3 of the pages were devoted to the immigration issue. Statuary Hall served as the House of Representatives until 1857. 4 presidents were inaugurated in here. 1 president died in here, or had a stroke in here and then died in the Speaker's office next door, and that, of course, was John Quincy Adams. Bill Huizenga is a Republican. and he represents the state of Michigan. Congressman, is the president going to win Michigan again in 2020?
That was close, 10,000 votes a couple of years ago. So Michigan is one of those purple states. People split their ticket. They kind of go back and forth. It's interesting. My mom's a good Irish Catholic from Flint, Michigan. Dad's a good Dutch Protestant from over in West Michigan. And we have some interesting family discussions and reunions these days. And my UAW and CWA union cousins are kind of split all over the place. So it's really what Michigan reflects, I think.
Where's your district?
So I'm over on the west side. I've got the suburbs of Grand Rapids, Holland, up to Ludington.
Okay. So what did you hear in the president's speech that just made you stand up and applaud?
For me, one of those issues was the life issue when he addressed what's been happening in New York and Virginia, and the need for this country to deal with a late-term abortion situation. That is something that's very important to me. And by extension, I believe vast majority of my constituents as well. The other side of things, acknowledging where we are on the economy. We've got a red-hot economy in West Michigan. It is a very tight labor markets. Acknowledging that we need to have a robust legal immigration system it was, I think, a positive from the president. That was an acknowledgement of that, and that's the realities of what we are seeing back home. And it was far less confrontational, I think, than a lot of people had expected the president. I think he was trying to be aspirational when he was talking about what are we going to do with this moment, when he was challenging Congress. We're going to be able to rise above this. Are we going to choose greatness? Are we going to choose that? I think it was resistance versus results, and that I think was a positive element of what he was trying to put together. He seemed fairly lighthearted up there at times. Clearly, there was some very heavy things. Whether it's the 10-year-old girl who is recovering from brain cancer, or the victims of the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, the ICE agent and the work that he had done on human trafficking. There were some very heavy moments, but to see Buzz Aldrin, for example, up there and to celebrate the moon landing, and as well as the end of World War II. My dad was a disabled World War II veteran, so that 75-year anniversary is significant.
A lot of people bring guests. A lot of members bring guests. Do you bring a guest out?
I did, and actually I brought my son, who's a junior in college. It's the first time that he's been. He's right over. He is. Come on over. So this is Garrett.
Thank you.
He makes you look short, Congressman.
Yeah.
Hi, Garrett. Where do you go to school?
I go to school at King's College in New York City.
So, do you agree with your father politically?
Yes, I do. Yes. Yep. He taught me well. So, yeah.
What's it like being in New York City, being a kid from Western Michigan?
It was a bit of a culture shock, but I love the Kings. I love the community and the school. And New York's just a great city. It's kind of a wild city for a West Michigan boy like myself and my dad. But yeah, while I'm still young, I enjoy it.
So was this your first State of the Union?
Yes, this was.
Impression?
I thought it was great, and I was listening to what my dad was saying. I thought the president was on target and on message, and I did really appreciate that. So,
did your dad introduce you to anybody out there that you wanted to meet?
The president, actually. Yes, we actually caught him afterwards. I got him to.
You got to show us
to
this.
sign the ticket.
Just hang on.
Yeah.
We're going to make sure we get in on that. So, where did you catch him afterwards? Right in the aisle?
No, this was yeah.
All right. You got that, Ben? All right, we got to show that. Signed ticket. We won't show this to Congressman Green because he won't think much of that.
So we came out of the chamber, and we're headed here to Statuary Hall, and the president is just coming out of the chamber and said, "Hey, Garrett, let's go see if we can get up there." And he was very kind, took a moment and actually said to him, he commented about him being taller than me, but then he commented just about, he said, "Hey, your dad must really like you if he's giving you the one ticket." But Garrett is studying economics, political science, and philosophy, and this is kind of up his alley. And this was thought this was a special way that we could share this together.
Congressman Huizenga and Garrett Huizenga, thanks for your time this evening.
Hey, thanks, appreciate it.
Now, somebody who did not get a signed ticket is Al Green, a Democrat from Texas, Houston. And Congressman Green, you didn't even attend the speech tonight, did you?
I did not. My protest continues. I felt that it was appropriate that I watch it from my office, and I did. And I took copious notes. I think the president can be complimented for his comments about women and the progress that's been made, especially in terms of those that have been elected to the House of Representatives. I might add that the Republicans didn't do a lot to increase that number. Democrats did, and I'm honored to be a proud Democrat. But I'm also proud to be an American. And I was saddened by the fact that the president equated peace with legislation and equated war with investigation. Meaning, if we continue to investigate the lawful investigation, I might add, of what happened with the Russians in our election, that somehow our legislative agenda is going to be sidetracked. It won't be embraced by him. That was a sad thing for him to say. I think we have to allow that investigation to continue, and I think we must continue to proceed with the legislative process.
And have you introduced articles of impeachment?
I have I've co-sponsored this term with Mr. Brad Sherman, but I have in the past introduced articles that were actually voted on the floor. My hope is that it won't be necessary to do this again, but the president hasn't atoned for the bigotry in policy that he has perpetrated upon our country. And without some sort of atonement, that can't just evaporate. I refuse to be a part of normalizing bigotry. This is one of the reasons why I did not go to the State of the Union, because I can see how the president, in doing some good, can be perceived as being a good person who would not do some of the things that he's done. But it's not unusual for persons who have been engaged in bigotry to do some good. We have a building named after Senator Russell. He was one of the most staunch segregationists of his time. He did some good. He passed legislation to help some children, many of whom were African American. But that doesn't erase the fact that he was a segregationist and a white supremacist.
So should that building be renamed?
It absolutely should. I say it without question, reservation, hesitation, or equivocation.
What about from your own home state, Sam Rayburn? Did you consider him to not be such a good character as well, or not?
Well, I can tell you that he's had his flaws too. I don't try in any way to make excuses for people. I am focused on the president because he is the here and the now. I've not asked that we rename the building. You asked me if it should be. My answer is yes. But I'm focusing on the president because the president is placing bigotry into policy. What's happening to the babies at the border? We still have children who've been separated from their parents, haven't been reunited. We still have a circumstance where people seeking lawful asylum are being now labeled as terrorists, drug dealers, trying to make them criminals when they're coming here seeking help, and asylum is lawful. Asylees are people who are fleeing harm's way, and we ought not equate them to drug dealers and terrorists.
Congressman Green, the president, you represent Houston. Does immigration, illegal immigration, or whatever you want to call it, affect your city, number one? And the president spoke about that illegal immigration is depressing wages and taking jobs. Do you see that?
Well, that's just not true, and the president doesn't have empirical evidence to support that. Persons who come here work hard. Many of them don't get Social Security benefits. They pay into it but don't get it. Many of them pay taxes. Also, they create additional jobs by working and boosting the economy. So they're very helpful to this economy, and we ought not try to paint them as some sort of sinister element that's bringing down the American economy. There just is not the empirical evidence to support what the president says.
Now, the president has spent a lot of time in Texas for natural disasters or for the border. Have you ever traveled with him down there to Houston? Or
I have. I've been with the president, met him in Houston. We shook hands, we had a conversation, but that doesn't mean that I agree with the policies that are hurting Americans. I'm going to give you an example of something that's happening right now. The president's refusal to step aside, given all that he's done to harm American society, is allowing a governor now to assume, I think, that if the president can say these ugly things and get away with them, if he can say things about women and get away with it, if he can say things about African Americans, have a Muslim ban, if he can say there were some very fine people among those in Charlottesville, should I have to resign? I meaning the governor. I think that he is setting a tone and tenor that is going to allow others to assume that they can be comfortable doing things that we at one time would have demanded an immediate withdrawal from a public office.
So that said, should Governor Northam, Democrat of Virginia, resign?
He should. He should. He should resign, because if we allow this, what will we say when someone has a Nazi uniform on and is giving a salute to the Führer? What will we say? It doesn't get better, it gets worse. We have to look this kind of bigotry in the eye and let bigotry know that we won't tolerate it. If we do tolerate it, it only gets worse.
Al Green is a Democrat from Houston, Texas.
Thank you.
Post State of the Union, few minutes with C-SPAN.
C-SPAN is fair. The fairest network out there. Thank you.
There's our commercial. Thank you, sir. French Hill is a Republican from Alabama, and from Arkansas. Sorry about that, sir. And he was on the phone.
How are you?
Nice to see you. Who is your guest tonight?
My guest tonight was Khalid Kamamaz. His father is held in an Assad prison.
Gentleman right here.
Yep.
Hi, how are you?
Good,
Once again, the name?
Khalid Kamamaz. His father was captured by the Assad regime when he was in Damascus on family business to comfort a family member for loss 2 years ago, and the family has not seen him since. We know that he was picked up by the Assad regime. We believe him to be in prison in Syria, and along with other Americans, I wanted my friend to be here to talk about his family and also to help the American people understand that despite all the complexity in Syria, we have Americans in Assad prisons too, and we need to make sure we bring them home.
So what's your reaction, Congressman, to the president calling for a withdrawal from Syria, or the controversy or the conversation?
Right. When he first announced his precipitous withdrawal, I was very clear that I opposed it. I think we have to have an allied plan for the northern border with the Kurds and with the Turks on how we're going to handle northeast of Syria and how we're going to eliminate the remnants of ISIS that the president talked about today, which are principally along the Iraqi border in the lower Euphrates Valley. But more importantly is the impact of the Americans saying that we're going to leave without a plan triggers Assad's brutal activities with the refugees that are in Idlib province or down near Al Tanf on the Jordanian border. So I don't mind the theory that we should come out of Syria, but we need to do it in the right way so that we don't put our Americans at risk that are there, our soldiers that are there, and the refugee population that's in the country.
Now, how did you get in touch with Congressman Hill after your father was arrested in Damascus?
My father he got married in Arkansas, in Little Rock, and that's where he went to school. So he was a constituent of his area quite a while ago, though. But we have been in touch with him through our media specialist that was able to contact Congressman Hill and get us in touch. And he's been very helpful and very kind to us, and he's been representing our father way better than we could ever do without him.
Have you had any contact? Do you even know if your father's alive?
We have not had any direct contact, but from what we hear, from what we believe, from what we feel that he's still alive.
Do we have any diplomatic presence in Syria at this point?
Our consular operations in Syria are handled through the Czech embassy in Damascus. So we have been in touch with the Czech officials, and at one time, shortly after Dr. Kamamaz was taken, they verified that in fact he'd been taken by the Assad regime. But we've had radio silence since that time. So our State Department's working closely with the Czech consular officials and pressing this case. And we look forward to working with Ambassador O'Brien, who is the President's Special Envoy for Refugees Affairs, on this issue. But we want to bring all the Americans home that are trapped in the terrible conditions of an Assad prison.
Mr. Kamamaz, I know you have a very heavy heart right now with all the issues going on, but what's your impression of tonight and the State of the Union speech?
Well, it was a very interesting event to attend, and I'm very grateful and honored to be here. I was hoping that President Trump would be able to speak a little bit more about his plans, but I guess maybe there's a special time for that.
That issue aside, and you've spoken about your views on Syria withdrawal, where did the president get you up off your feet?
I was inspired by his hearkening to the greatness of Americans past and calling on Democrats and Republicans who work together ably every day to find common ground to choose greatness. I love that line, and I thought having the World War II veterans there combined with the survivors of the Holocaust was a thing of beauty, and it got me off my feet. My father-in-law was one of the first U.S. Army officers into Buchenwald concentration camp in April 1945. I've heard his stories. I've been to Auschwitz. I know the trauma of World War II, and I thought that was a unifier, and I appreciate the president making that connection.
Where's home for you now?
I live in Indiana right now.
Where in Indiana?
Northwest Indiana.
And how much time have you traveled to Syria? Are you able to?
No, I haven't been to Syria since 2004. It's not a very safe place to go. However, my father did double check and triple check all the security checkpoints and everywhere to make sure that it was clear for him to enter before he did. So it is safe to go if you double check your checkpoints.
Congressman Hill and your guest, thank you both for being here.
Thanks for being here.
And C-SPAN 2 is in Statuary Hall following the State of the Union. The president spoke for about an hour and a half, and there were times when both sides of the aisle stood up, and there were times when only one side of the aisle stood up. In the rear, you'll be able to see that clearly. There was a new camera located behind the speaker, and they used that quite extensively looking out. So when you watch the rear, you'll be able to see that. You can see the back of the president, and you can see the reaction from many members of Congress, including freshman Representative Veronica Escobar, a Democrat of Texas. Where's your district?
El Paso, Texas, right on the U.S.-Mexico border. The president mentioned El Paso tonight.
A little bit. Was he accurate in your view about what he said? Unsafe city, wall built, now safe city.
He actually lied. He pulled that out of the air. That is untrue. El Paso is one of the safest cities in America. We have been for decades. We were safe long before a wall was ever built. Our population is 1/4 immigrant. I was proud tonight to bring with me Zenaida Navar from El Paso. She's a dreamer. She's an educator. She's an activist. She is exactly what makes El Paso great, America great, and the border safe.
Zenaida, is it? Did I get that right? Hi. The Congresswoman said that you are a dreamer. So does that mean essentially you're in the country illegally? And I do use that word as a legal term.
So I currently hold DACA. Right. So currently I don't have a legal status. I am undocumented, and I'm a DACA recipient at the moment.
So the president has called for DACA reform, and did the Democrats agree to that? What was in the president's deal that you didn't agree with?
So the president removed temporary protections for DACA recipients and then later said, I'll give you back temporary protections for DACA recipients if you'll give me the permanent wall. So his grand bargain was fixing a problem he created that on a temporary status in exchange for a permanent structure.
So is there a is it difficult for you to work full-time as an educator without having that legal status?
The difficulty is in the uncertainty. You don't know how much to plan ahead. You don't know what career goals you can set for yourself. So it's very difficult to always give your best when you're never sure if you're going to be able to do that.
How do you present yourself for a job? I know that everybody has to present proof of citizenship, correct, anymore to be employed?
Well, I do have DACA, which is an employment authorization. So they're not legally allowed to question that as long as I present it. It's a legal document. I do have the authorization to work, so I am working legally.
So when did your parents come over and how?
So we came over in 1994.
Mexico?
Yes. From what I've been told, we crossed the river. My mother was actually pregnant with my little sister at the time, and that was it.
So does that make, technically, would that make her your little sister a U.S. citizen?
Yes, she was born here.
And you were how old?
I was 2 years old.
And so no memory of this at this point?
Whatsoever.
And where are your parents now?
My father is back in Mexico, and my mother is still here.
And her status, is she a citizen?
So right now she's in the process. She does have an application pending, so her status right now is up in the air.
Judge Escobar, I'm sorry, Congresswoman Escobar, being your first State of the Union, what did you think? Is it taken seriously, do you think? Or is it a little bit on the pageantry side?
Well, for me, these are always opportunities. Speeches such as these are always opportunities. The challenge is we ultimately will judge the outcome based on actions, not words. And to have the president say that he wants to unite us and he feels that we should come together, and then to effectively race bait is really troubling. You know, he did his best to try to portray immigrants as dangerous and as people that we should fear. This coming, and also frankly, tried to paint those who have compassion for immigrants as cruel, when in fact it's his administration that has ripped children from the arms of their parents and put them in cages. It's his administration that built a tent city to imprison child migrants. And in my district, it's his administration that is force-feeding detainees at a detention facility.
Veronica Escobar, Democrat, Texas, El Paso, replaced Beto O'Rourke.
That's right.
Freshman, thank you. And thank you for stopping by as well. We appreciate it. Raja Krishnamurthy is a Democrat of Illinois. Congressman, where's your district?
It's basically all the suburbs surrounding O'Hare International Airport, including the runways, but not the terminal. We could talk about gerrymandering another time.
Well, speaking of infrastructure then, the president devoted a couple of paragraphs to the State of the Union. Is it doable? Is it bipartisan?
I don't know. We need to hear specifics. We've been hearing about this for 2 years now, and it seems like there's infrastructure week every other week, but we don't see any concrete proposals that, you know, are actually workable in Congress.
Democrats are now in control in the House.
Well, I think Chairman DeFazio of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee should be putting forward a specific proposal. I hope that we can, you know, negotiate over that and actually get something done, because that is one of those types of issues, that prescription drug price reform and others, where I think there's a real appetite for bipartisanship.
What committees are you on, and what's on your agenda?
Well, I'm on the Intel Committee and the Oversight Committee. And so when the president said that investigations would be the equivalent of war and that we couldn't get work done on other matters, that felt like a shot across the bow. But, you know, at the end of the day, although we do have to deliver on pocketbook priorities for the American people, I think they hired us to be in the majority in Congress to actually serve as a check and balance as well. So we're going to continue to act as a check and balance and make sure that, you know, no one branch of government becomes too powerful.
Well, Congressman, you've got two committees.
Yeah.
that are both doing investigations on the president. How much of the time on those committees is going to be devoted to that?
Well, for instance, on the Oversight Committee, that has quite a bit of jurisdiction on the prescription drug price issue. So I think we will spend a fair amount of time on that. But on the other hand, those investigations have been long pending because there was no oversight in the last 2 years. In fact, some people called my committee the lack of oversight committee. And so now we have to change the way we do business and get back to, having a check and balance.
Raja Krishnamurthy, did I get it right?
Yes, sir.
Congressman, Democrat, Illinois. Thank you.
Sir.
Represents O'Hare. If you ever fly through O'Hare, this is the man you want to call and complain to.
Hey, or compliment.
And complain to.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, the new chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee is Elliot Engel, Democrat of New York, longtime member of Congress. Congressman, a couple of foreign affairs issues before we go any further. Venezuela, should the U.S. have a role in getting rid of President Maduro?
Well, I think the U.S. should have a role in making sure that the Venezuelan people can get what they want. I would hope that we could work our way to helping them with a new election so it will be clear who they really support. The leader, the opposition leader, seems good to me, but I have a little difficulty with anointing someone as the leader. I think the Venezuelan people should decide, and I think the administration is handling it just about right. We shouldn't be doing this alone. We should be working with our allies in the OAS, and that's what we're doing. So I'm hoping that there will be a transition, because I do know one thing: Maduro can no longer govern Venezuela.
Have you had a chance to talk with Secretary Pompeo since you become chairman?
Yes, I have, and I suspect we'll have some more talks. He's promised me that he will come to our committee for a hearing soon, very soon, and we have talked a few times.
And you probably knew him when he was in here in Congress anyway, correct?
Yes, and I like him, and I think that we may not agree on everything, but I think he's somebody who wants to do a good job and someone that we can talk with, and I look forward to him coming.
Syria withdrawal.
Awful, terrible. We shouldn't be doing it. Mattis, who is well respected, the defense secretary, resigned in protest. You have to believe that he hated it in order for him to have such a violent reaction by resigning. We have not won the war against ISIS, and getting out of there, in my opinion, makes it more likely that there'll be a war between Iran and Israel, because Iran will move in there and there'll be nothing to stop them. They'll be right on Israel's border. And I also think that our loyal and faithful allies, the Kurds, are left high and dry to be hurt by Turkey or anything else. I don't think that's the way the United States should be acting. We'll never get people to align with us if we get tired, pick up our marbles and leave those people vulnerable. It's just not right.
Chairman Engel, the president also talked in his State of the Union tonight about a new Middle East policy, called it a realistic policy.
Well, I'm not sure what he was referring to by that. I do agree with his moving the embassy to Jerusalem, our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. And I think that he spoke about anti-Semitism, which is something I think that's obviously ties in with Israel, and I think we've said some important things. So I hope the United States will continue to support Israel, and I think that hopefully we can get some peace in the Middle East.
Did you know the president back in New York?
No, I really didn't. I mean, I knew of him for sure. It's actually a funny story, which I'll try to make quicker rather than longer. I actually met him in the first time in California in a restaurant, and he wasn't president. He wasn't declared. He was in New York. He was a Democrat, and he told me if I ever needed any help to give him a call. So good thing we never talked.
Elliot Engel is the new chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. We appreciate your spending a few minutes with us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. And Jeff Fortenberry represents the 1st District, I believe,
Yes,
of
that's
Nebraska.
correct. Lincoln, Nebraska is my
You
home.
had a pretty close election this last round, didn't you? Am I wrong about that?
Well, you're somewhat wrong about that, but look, the people sent me here by a strong majority. I'm pleased by that. But it was a tough political year in a lot of ways, and you have to go out in the field and earn it every year. So I did.
Did the president make it tough for y'all?
I thought we were going to talk about the State of the Union tonight. So
There, we're just having conversations with everybody who comes by.
Obviously, the country is very divided, and when you have a disruptive president like President Trump, who has said we're no longer going to do this and this and this, that has a great appeal to many people, particularly where I live. Other people, not so much. And so it has created an intensity, I think, of certain divisions, but not necessarily harder pathways. It just has created intensity of pathways.
So we'll go to that question now. What was the State of the Union like for you tonight?
I thought, well, first of all, this is a great American political tradition. It's America's theater. And yet at the same time, there's a nobleness to it, to this great tradition. I thought the president overall was very conciliatory, particularly the way he began, very inviting. His end, and I spoke to him afterward on the aisle, was soaring, and I commended him for that. There were many lists of things that should have bipartisan appeal. Overall, it was very respectful in the body tonight. Now, setting aside the border issue, I think he wasn't necessarily speaking to the body, he was speaking to the American public to try to create the political preconditions for consideration of the fact that there are problems there and we have to work toward immediate solutions. Look, charity can't flow out of chaos, and a vibrant, good, just immigration system is a hallmark of who we are as Americans. But when there's chaos and disorder at your border, it undermines our ability to be generous. So I think, again, that wasn't a case necessarily just to Congress, but to the broader American public about how, again, good immigration policy flows out of an orderly immigration system that begins with border security.
Congressman Fortenberry, do you agree with the president about the wall or the border security?
What I have suggested, and I think you should make note of this, there was no money discussion. There was not, I want 5.7 versus 1.6. There was none of that. There was flexibility in his language. There was firmness of principle and firmness of intent, but also flexibility in the way in which he defined terms. I've suggested just go back to President Obama's era and the Department of Homeland Security's own studies, or the General Accountability Office's own studies about the high-intensity problematic areas that have been targeted for some type of creative barrier, hardened barrier in the past. That way it gets you out of the money discussion. It goes back to an area, a time when there was clear agreement that some type of border barrier, wall or other significant barrier, such as a fence, there was widespread agreement on. But when it's targeted and necessary, and then in the other places, you use smarter technology as well as personnel.
Now, when you first came to Congress, were you in the minority? Have you been in the minority before?
I have.
So, what's the difference? A lot?
Yeah, committee staff for one. The bulk of the committee momentum moves to the majority, and they control agendas, and that's a big adjustment for a lot of Republicans, to be honest with you.
So, how can Republicans, in your view, be effective in this Congress?
Well, look, the same lessons in life apply here. You got to be in relationship with people, and I think if you're having authentic dialogue, standing on principle, fighting for what you believe, but also working toward it at the same time, not just digging in and saying no or I won't budge, but working toward what you believe, even if you may not get it all in one moment, is, look, I come from Nebraska. I think we invented the expression, get her done. That's what most people want. They want you to state who you are clearly and what you're trying to achieve, but then work toward that consensus. So I think a lot of consensus kind of language was in the speech tonight, accepting certain things like the border dynamic, but there was a lot there, and again, the room was, from my vantage, very respectful.
Jeff Fortenberry, Republican of Nebraska, thanks for your time. And somebody who represents a border district down in Texas and has been in Congress and not been in Congress and been in Congress and not been in Congress, Congressman Cuellar, Democrat of Texas, you have been in and out of Congress. Is that a fair, am I correct about that?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'm thinking of somebody else. I apologize. I was thinking of one of those districts where they keep switching seats.
Yeah.
Laredo is your district?
Yes, sir. Laredo is my district itself.
All right. How's Nuevo Laredo doing, by the way? There was some real violence going on there a couple years ago.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because when you look at the border, on the Mexican side, they do have problems with the drug cartels. No ifs, no buts about it. On the U.S. side, if you look at the border crime rate and compare it using the FBI stats, rape, murder, assaults, the border crime rate is lower than the national crime rate. For example, FBI stats, 5.3 murders per 100,000 is the national average. You look at the border towns, they're below that. And in fact, when people talk to me about what's the most dangerous thing about the border, you know what it is? When I leave Laredo and I fly to Washington, D.C., because Washington is about 3 or 4 times more dangerous per 100,000 individuals than Laredo, my hometown on the border.
All right. The president said tonight, I will not eliminate ICE, and he honored a Border Patrol agent. What was your reaction?
I agree with that. I mean, if you recall, last year we had a resolution on ICE, and I spoke on that. I mean, we shouldn't abolish ICE because, again, look, ICE, if you look at ICE, it's composed of different components. Immigration enforcement is only one part, but they do child pornography. They work against fight drugs, guns, name it. They do a lot. A lot of people don't understand what ICE does. So Border Patrol, I believe in making sure that we support our Border Patrol. But at the same time, what the president needs to understand that we also need the CBP, which are the men and women in blue at the ports, because that's where most of the drugs are coming in.
Congressman Cuellar, how much of your time, because you do represent Laredo and the border area, is spent having to talk about this or talking about this or working on this? And when you're not working on border issues, what else are you working on?
Well, you know, it's interesting because a lot of people use the border as a punching bag. I mean, when they use all those negatives, it makes it hard for us to attract business, bring doctors over here because they feel that the border is unsafe. But the border is a very safe place to be. But one of the things I would say that if you look at the border, it's a very dynamic place. For example, my hometown of Laredo, or look at trade between the U.S. and Mexico, every day there's more than $1.3 billion of trade between the U.S. and Mexico. That's over $1 million every single minute. And we got to understand we need border security, but you cannot impede legitimate trade and tourism.
So that said, USMCA.
Yes.
Supporter?
Oh, I'm a big supporter of trade. Oh, I am.
But of the deal that the president and Canada and Mexico came up with.
Well, I mean, I would have done it a little bit different, but I think the implementation language will address some of those issues that we have. And again, look, there are 5 million American jobs because of Mexico. So we need to make sure that we get what I call NAFTA 2.0 passed.
Henry Cuellar, thank you for being with us. I apologize for taking you out of your seat. I did not mean to do that. I thought that was the district that kept switching back and forth.
Well, I think you're talking. I know which one you're talking. That was another congressman from San Antonio on that.
There we go.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much.
We want to introduce you to a freshman member of Congress now.
Thanks.
And this is Deb Haaland, Democrat of New Mexico. Did I pronounce your name right, Congresswoman?
Holland like the country, yes.
All right. Where's your district? What part of New Mexico?
Mexico's 1st Congressional District. Albuquerque is the largest city in my districts. It's pretty smack dab in the middle of New Mexico.
What were you doing prior to becoming Congresswoman Haaland?
I was a tribal administrator for the Pueblo, one of the Pueblos in New Mexico, ran all the federal programs. And but I've done lots of things. I've owned my own business. I ran a service provider for mentally disabled adults. I was also chairwoman of my state's Democratic Party.
At what point did you say, I'm going to run for Congress?
You know, I probably right before I did it. I filed at the beginning of May and announced the middle of May. You know, I was finishing up my term as state chair. We had just won across the state in 2016. And I just really felt like I wanted to continue to serve the people of my state, and I felt I could do that by running for office.
What two issues motivated you?
Climate change. Two issues, there's lots of them,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
climate change is the big one. Climate change and renewable energy and health care, of course.
And what do you mean, of course?
Health care, people need health care, right? People in my district and across our state were in fear of losing their health care. They were in fear of being denied coverage on, for pre-existing conditions. There's always a worry about that. Half of my state is Medicaid eligible. Thankfully, the governor that we had previously took the Medicaid expansion. However, it's always a worry.
So when you go back and watch the video of tonight's State of the Union address, you'll see you and some of your colleagues high-fiving at one point. Who got that started and what was that about?
Well, of course, we're thrilled and excited that there's 102 women in Congress.
Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, most of those are on our side of the aisle.
A quarter of the Democratic population here in the House is women.
Yes. So we won. Tonight we all wore white in solidarity for women's suffrage. It's 100 years since women had the right to vote. And if you think about it, the president's partially responsible for this huge win of Democrats and of women.
And he seemed to have a little fun with you at that point in his speech.
Yeah, sure, yes. No, we're excited, right? We're all working together. We all have each other's backs. We're going to fight hard to make sure that we're moving our country forward.
All right, you come from a very partisan background, chair of the Democratic Party in New Mexico and Democratic Congresswoman. Have you had a chance to meet any of the Republicans, your neighbors, or on your committees yet?
Absolutely, yes. And in fact, Mr. Tom Cole from Oklahoma, he's the chair.
Native
Him and
American
I, yes.
as well.
Him and I are co-chairs of the Native American Caucus now. We're going to agree on a lot of things with Native American issues. Dusty Johnson from South Dakota, I ran into him earlier. We're gonna do some things together for tribes in his state as well. So I think we have a lot in common. We're going to find common ground on a lot of issues, and I hope that we do.
You mentioned climate change and health care as two issues that motivated you to run for Congress. Did the president address those issues to your satisfaction tonight?
No, not at all. He did say pre-existing conditions. That's hopeful for us, right? How they get there is an issue. We want to make sure, is it true? Are they truly going to cover pre-existing conditions? Or are they going to make it so expensive? They'll cover it, but it's so expensive that people can't afford it. So we'll have to see what that looks like. But he certainly did not mention climate change. That's a huge issue for so many of us freshmen who came into Congress this time around. So we're going to keep fighting for that.
Deb Haaland, freshman, Democrat, New Mexico, has been our guest here on C-SPAN in the Statuary Hall. Nice to meet you. And that's going to conclude our time up here in Statuary Hall tonight. As you can see, it's breaking down a bit, and the speech is going to re-air several times overnight on C-SPAN, and you can watch these interviews as well online at cspan.org.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal.